Yet another session on business environment. My name is Lemon Yatu. In our session today, we'll be looking at the topic micro-environmental strategic analysis using the industry attractiveness analysis framework. The learning objective for the session will include an understanding of the micro-environment itself, industry attractiveness, what makes an industry attractive, or the various factors that determine industry attractiveness. And we'll also use Porter's 5 forces as a framework in analyzing industry attractiveness. Of course, when analyzing the environment, there are the macro aspect of the analysis and also the micro aspect of the analysis. Our session will focus on the micro environment. And when we talk about micro environment, this is the environment that is under the control of a company, the environment that a company exerts or can significantly influence. Forces within a company that could affect the ability of that company to serve its customers fall under the micro environment of a business. These are some of the actors or some of the aspects of the micro environment, which is important to mention. We have the company itself, the suppliers, the marketing intermediaries, customers, competitors, and also the public. All these are some of the aspects of the micro environment in which the better position a company is, the better it will be in terms of influencing and also controlling some of these aspects mentioned. What then is industry attractiveness? What is it all about? It is the degree to which an industry is either appealing or appalling to a business. Such determines the attractiveness of an industry. A situation where an industry looks appealing, perhaps because of some of the opportunities and the advantages that it presents, it makes the attractive nature of the industry to be heightened. And then, of course, there are times where an industry could be appalling or a put off to businesses in terms of considering whether to venture in or not. And of course, when we look at the attractiveness of industries, there are different factors that perhaps could explain why an industry is attractive. And one of the leading proponents or leading thinkers whilst looking at the attractiveness of industries is Michael Porter, who came up with the 5 forces that shapes competition. It came out in the 1980s with the book Competitive Strategy, which we will look in more detail. Factors that affect industry attractiveness. There are different factors that could explain the reason why an industry is more attractive than other industries. One of those factors could be the market size. If the market size is big enough to contain or to accommodate different competitors, that potentially could be a point of attraction. If the market growth is not declining, but rather is growing, or at a point where companies can easily come in and of course gain competitive advantage, that potentially could also be a point of attraction. And of course, the pricing trends could be a factor that affects or informs the attractive nature of an industry. Intensity of competition is one of them, which we will again look at in more detail. How intense is the competition? What is the dynamics of competition within that very industry? And of course, overall risk in the industry is also one of the factors that determines whether an industry is attractive or less attractive. And then, of course, opportunity to differentiate products and services is also another factor worth mentioning. More specifically is the framework developed by Michael Porter, the Porter's 5 forces. It's a useful tool in determining the attractiveness of an industry. And what that framework or the tool looks at most specifically is the competitive intensity and also the attractiveness of the market. Is it highly attractive? Is the level of competition intense? Or what kind of dynamics characterized the industry? And of course, an unattractive industry is one in which the overall effect of the forces reduces profitability. In other words, the forces or the factors which Michael Porter opined, the more higher those factors are, the less profitable potentially it could be for a company venturing into such an industry. And of course, companies use models when deciding on whether to enter a particular industry or not. And the 5 forces presents a very robust and viable tool for understanding the dynamics of an industry before venturing in. These are the 5 factors. It includes internal rivalry, threat of substitutes, power of buyers, barrier to entry, and also the supplier power. All these are the various factors or the forces that shapes competition or determines whether an industry is attractive enough for a company or a business to venture in or not. Looking at the first one, internal rivalry. This force measures how intense the rivalry or the competition is within an industry. And of course, it's important to mention that where there is intense or significant degree of rivalry or competition, potentially that could reduce the profit potential for companies within that very industry. And of course, that would reduce the attractive nature of that very industry. Trade of substitutes. In the model, substitute products refer to products that can be substituted for the other. An industry where the product or the service on offer is such that customers can get the same from other industries or other companies. It limits the ability of companies within that industry to increase or to raise their prices up. And potentially that could be a put off or a point that makes an industry less attractive. Simply because virtually all companies are in business to maximize shareholder value. And if the industry is such that there are so many substitute products within that very industry, when prices are such that is limited, companies can increase their prices. What that means then is the profitability within that very industry will be limited, which of course won't really be a positive for shareholder value maximization. Power of buyers. The more powerful the buyers are within the industry, the more significant impact that could have on pricing within that very industry. And so the model is suggesting that an industry that is attractive ought to have a very limited or low power of buyers. Buyers shouldn't be exercising or should not be in a position whereby they exercise or exert so much control or significant influence such that they're able to change the price in the industry at any time. Barriers to entry. Entering an industry often comes with significant cost in some industries, I must mention. Some is less hectic, less stringent. So where there is so much barrier to entry, in most cases, for some companies, it presents an attraction for many. But where companies can easily float into an industry without much barriers, it makes that very industry or that the dynamics within that very industry to be less attractive to some companies. And of course, I should mention that it acts as a deterrent against new competitors. So it is best in this framework that for an industry to be attractive, the barrier to entry should be as high as possible, such that it reduces new entrants, it reduces competition. A very good example of this would be the extractive industry, whereby entering such industries is capital intensive. It will require a company to invest significantly. And in such cases, you will easily find out, or you would easily notice that there's a limited competition within that very space. And then the final point on this very slide is the supplier power. How powerful are the suppliers? Every company, every organization, it operates within a supply chain, or it has a supply chain that is connected or is knitted to its operation. So the point here is that when suppliers are more powerful than a company, then potentially it could be very dangerous for a company, in the sense that suppliers can demand premium prices, and where suppliers are demanding premium prices, such could stand as a limitation, or it could cap the extent to which profit can be maximized within that very space. Some very significant questions worth asking when talking about the Porter's 5 forces. For example, if we look at the intensity of competitive rivalry, the key question there is how many firms compete and how much is the market growing? How many firms are competing and how much is the market growing? In a situation where there are so many competitors and the market is not growing, it presents a very big challenge, in the sense that there will be too much concentration, and of course the forces of demand and supply comes in. When there are too many companies providing the same product in a market that is not growing, it pushes price down, and of course it reduces the profitability of organizations, which renders the industry in some ways less attractive. And when you look at the threat of new entrants, the key question there is how easy is it for new businesses to set up their shops? When companies find it so easy to move into an industry, it creates an atmosphere whereby the industry becomes too saturated within a very short period of time. And of course, when there is too much saturation within an industry, it becomes a fight or competition for market share, which of course it does not really sit well with profitability and also expansion. And of course, we have the bargaining power of buyers. How much power do customers have? As I mentioned, the more powerful the customers are, the less attractive the industry is. How much power do suppliers have? In the same way, when suppliers command so much power, they command so much influence within the supply chain, it limits the attractiveness of the industry. And of course, looking at the threat of substitutes, how likely are customers to switch to an alternative service or product? When customers have the option of switching from one product or service to the other, again, on the overall, it does not really sit well with a company or an industry, because customers can afford to switch at any time. And that is not so much a positive for a company, looking at it from this very point of view. Again, this is a more expansive diagram that looks at the forces, Port 5 forces opined by Porter. If you look at each one of them, there are different points, different examples. For example, rivalry among existing competitors, which I mentioned. How many competitors are there within the industry? Diversity of the competitors. How diverse are they? Industry concentration, as I mentioned, how highly concentrated is the industry? The same with threat of new entrants. Are the barriers of entry high or is it low? The higher the barriers, the more attractive the industry is. The lower the barriers, the less attractive, because then it opens a floodgate for anyone to move into the industry. Bargaining powers, number of customers, size of each customer order, differences between competitors. So these are some of the key points that underpins this very model. An attractive industry profile. We've looked at Porter's 5 forces, the various points under each. How does an attractive industry look? What is the nature of the profile of an industry that is attractive? It's important to mention that there are characteristics, specific characteristics that defines or underpins an industry that is attractive. The first point is the threat of new entrants is low, as I mentioned. When the threat of new entrants is low, what that means is that there is so much comfort for the few companies that are operating within that very industry. In other words, there will be no any kind of surprise coming in, having a lot of companies flooding into the industry at the same time, perhaps because of maybe the capital intensive nature of the entrance. As I mentioned, given an example of extracting industry, let's say an oil company, for example, it's capital intensive, or the shipping industry is capital intensive. So in such kind of industries, you will easily see that the threat of new entrants is very low. And of course, that makes the industry highly attractive. We have the bargaining power of suppliers. When it's weak, then it makes it attractive. Bargaining power of buyers is weak. Threat of substitute products is low. The intensity of rivalry among industry competitors is low. And of course, the complementary products or the services are unavailable. So when we have lows in each of these points, or weakness, for example, the power of buyers and suppliers, that makes an industry attractive, because the whole point is all around ensuring that competition is as minimal as possible. I should also mention that it's not just about the industry attractiveness, but also the competitive strength of the business unit. It's one thing for an industry to be competitive, highly attractive, and it's another thing for the companies or an organization to be able to garner the muscle and present a competitive strength that will enable maximization or such an attractive industry to be taken advantage of. Where the industry is highly attractive and the competitive strength of the business unit is limited, very often you find companies trying to protect themselves. And of course, where there is high attractiveness and high competitive strength, companies would want to always invest. They want to just double in. The same thing when you have high attractiveness and perhaps low competitive strength. In such cases, you easily would see things like diversification. So conclusively, it is important to mention that the framework allows companies to understand the dynamics of the environment within which they operate. Simply because if an organization is not aware of the environment within which it operates, the attractive nature and also the competitive dynamics, then to a very large degree, the company will be operating pretty much with a blind spot, which could be deterrent or very negative in terms of profitability and also competitiveness. Thank you for listening. If you have any question, we will have a more robust discussion in our seminar session. Thank you.